Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Support Now podcast. Today, I am joined by our wonderful guest, Jillian Arnold. Jillian is an incredible mom, creator, who's talking all things grief despite a diagnosis, giving updates on her journey being a medical parenting mama. So, Jillian, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you
Of course.
again.
Again, and again.
Yeah,
As I always say, I find a lot of joy in helping spread awareness of all different types of families that are navigating major life moments. Your major life moment, of course, is more, I'd say, chronic, more consistent, and I think there's a lot to learn as supporters, as people in a community that want to show up for women and moms like you. So to start, I'd love for you to share a little bit more about your story and about your family.
sure. So yeah, you gave a pretty great introduction already on me. But a little bit about my family. I have two amazing kiddos, Roman and Stella, who are both diagnosed with an ultra rare genetic condition, which is called ASMD, stands for acid sphingomyelinase deficiency. It's a mouthful. We actually got my son's diagnosis when he was about 8 months old. Children with this condition are usually perfectly healthy babies when they're first born, and then they start showing signs of regression or symptoms kinda start to accumulate after time, which is why, he was diagnosed around 8 months old, which at that point, we had just found out that we were pregnant with our daughter, so our 2nd child. So we quickly found out because it was a genetic condition. Myself and my husband both happened to carry the same rare mutation, which both parents have to carry in order to pass this down to their offspring. So we found out that any children that we do have will have a 25% chance of inheriting this disease,
Mm.
and being diagnosed with it. They will have a 50% chance of just being a carrier, and then a 25% chance of, being totally unaffected. So it was definitely a lot to take in at first. We were first-time parents with our son. He was our entire world. He was the first grandkid on both sides of our family. He was the apple of everyone's eye, and it was like our lives were just kind of flipped upside down in the blink of an eye, when we got this diagnosis and, finding out we were pregnant and bringing another life into the world just a few days before this. It was going from, like, the most beautiful feeling in the world to the worst news that you could possibly hear. So it was definitely an emotional roller coaster ride, to say the least, for me and my husband, and our family as well. Our, like I said, grandparents, aunts, uncles, they were all affected by this too. So yeah, and I failed to mention we live in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I am married. I've been married for almost 10 years now, which is crazy to
That's
say.
great. And you guys have
Yeah.
endured quite a bit. So I want to go back for a second. You talked about, your world flipping upside down. I'd love you to be more descriptive. Like what emotions were you actually feeling?
I think we were shocked, first of all. I mean, my husband and I are both healthy adults. We didn't really have any family history of rare genetic conditions. So it was honestly like shocking. It was terrifying. It was incredibly sad, scary, all the things, because their condition is so rare. Like, for reference, for listeners out there, we our children get care at Cincinnati Children's, which was voted the number 1 pediatric hospital in the country for the past 2 years. It's a really great hospital, and after his diagnosis, the geneticist we met with said that they haven't seen a case of this in, like, 20 years at their hospital. So that alone was terrifying, because we were basically told that, kids with the more severe form of this, they don't live past age 3, and there's no treatments or cures available. So we kind of left feeling just at a loss. I knew I couldn't just sit back and watch my kids deteriorate, but I didn't know what to do from there. Plus, we were dealing with the immense grief that was all consuming, and I was pregnant at the time. So it was just, I always, whenever people ask me this question, I always kind of like I think of my life now in two parts. Like there was pre diagnosis and then there was post diagnosis me. And, everything changed just in a moment. Your perspective, your priorities, just your entire life.
And were you open with how you were feeling with friends and family? Like, how did you actually cope with it? Did you like kind of talk me through like how you began to process it? Because like you mentioned, and I think the word grief is certainly appropriate here, and everyone talks about how everyone grieves differently. So how did you actually kind of work through all of that?
I handled it in a certain way. So my sister, obviously, when we got his diagnosis, I was completely devastated. I cried, I think, for like 3 days straight, like just straight crying. I was so scared, and my sister, bless her heart, she was here. She stayed with me the whole weekend because my husband had to work, and I just, like, couldn't be alone, and she's very much the type of person that's like, "Let's start researching, like, let's join all these groups," and at first, I felt like I wasn't ready for that. Looking back, that was once I did start reaching out to other families, it was the best thing I coulda done. But at the time, I was still processing my own emotions and feelings, and I actually found myself getting more depressed when I would get on, like, Facebook groups and, like, I felt like that was what I needed to be doing, but it was depressing me so much to, like, see all these other children struggling, or, like, when I heard about kids passing away, it was just like, I don't know if I was kinda living in a state of denial for a period of time. Like, I would look at these kids and I'm like, "This isn't gonna be Roman's story. This isn't gonna be how he turns out." And it took me probably maybe a few months before I really started kinda, like, dipping my toe into the water of, like, talking to other families, and I actually started by listening to podcasts geared towards parents of children with medical complexities, and it was listening to those podcasts, my world was opened up because I was like, "Wow, there are other people out there that, like, relate to what I'm going through and, like, living a similar experience." Because at the time, it feels so incredibly isolating. You feel like the only person in the entire world, aside from my husband, that was going through something like this, and that's far from the case. Once I started listening to podcasts, that kinda started connecting me with other people, and then I made my social media, and then I really started kinda diving headfirst, into connecting with other parents, and it was everything to me. I mean, just the sheer thought of, like, knowing that I wasn't alone was so comforting.
So it sounds like again you took some time to process. You went at your own pace. Sometimes less is
For sure.
more.
Mhm.
For you, it sounded like you weren't ready for the avalanche of information that comes within the social media internet age where you can get answers on anything. It's almost like you didn't want to know.
Yeah.
You were like deferring or kind of putting that off. Yeah, it sounds like a little bit of denial, which is, I think, important to say out loud.
Yeah.
I'd imagine that there are people that feel guilty about denying what's right in front of them.
Yeah, and I at the time, like, I knew of other parents where their kids were diagnosed and they would just dive headfirst in, like, researching, like, doing all the things, fundraising, and it made me feel a lot of guilt that I wasn't, like, doing that and processing that way. I felt like I should have been doing so much more, but looking back, that's one, I guess, piece of advice that I feel like would be so beneficial for others to hear in a similar circumstance is take things at your own pace. It is a grieving process, and I promise you'll get to the other side. You have to go at your own pace, and there's no right or wrong way to grieve.
Yes, that's absolutely right, and, I've learned in talking to, families like yours that it is very natural for some people, they overfunction, right? Their gut, their knee jerk is to just dive into resources and almost, like, not pretend that it's not happening, but you go so far in the other direction, and there's a lot of people like you that might actually underfunction. Both are very reasonable. Both are very understandable given the circumstances, but to your point, it's going to look different, so don't judge yourself against someone who might be having the opposite reaction. I think overfunctioners look at people like you and they say, "Why can't I just slow down and think about this?
Mhm.
Why do I feel like I need to solve it? Why do I need to solve the problem?" It's like so I think that's, a really important part. One of the questions I had for you is, how did you after you got the diagnosis, how did your relationship and emotions toward Roman feel?
Oh, it was I mean, I remember the day we got his diagnosis. I distinctly remember me and my husband took the phone call outside because we saw it was the hospital calling. We knew that we were waiting on these results, and we got his diagnosis, and I remember just looking inside. I was standing on our deck. I was looking inside at my son who was playing. My sister was over. He was on the floor playing and laughing, and I can't put into words how devastating it was, but also confusing, right? Because my son looked so happy and he looked so healthy, and like I couldn't understand how this was happening, why it was happening. I very much went through a period of time that was like, why us? Why is this happening to us? And then once my daughter was born and diagnosed, it's like, okay, how is this happening again? I guess the biggest thing I felt was just devastation and just immense fear of what his life would look like, and there were so many unknowns at that point, and that's a really hard space to live in, especially when it comes to your children's health, living in that, like, constant state of unknown.
Early in the journey, it was a lot of unknowns. You're further along in the journey,
Mhm.
and you often talk about on your Instagram channel and privately we've spoken about still finding joy in it. So what were some of the things that you did, that you implemented, either yourself or with your husband, that allowed you to s kind of regain your footing and a foundation towards this joy or towards gratitude?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of had, like, a come to Jesus moment. Um, I wanna say, like, a year or so in, at first I went through just I felt like I was in a black hole and I could not find the light. I was depressed, I was angry at the world, I was angry at God, I was angry at everyone, um, and I will say that getting on antidepressants definitely helped. But there was a perspective shift that happened for me. Actually came across a quote. I wish I would have. Oh, I do have it down here. The quote was, "You don't have a right to the cards you think you should have been dealt. You have an obligation to play the hell out of the ones that you're holding." And I feel like after I read that quote, it really just resonated with me. And I started thinking more about it, and I was in that space of like, why us? Why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to my kids? But then I stopped and thought, well, why not us? My kids were obviously like me and my husband are fully capable, loving parents who obviously were entrusted with this very difficult journey, and we're going to do our best to make the best out of this situation. And I realized too, I didn't want what limited time I had with my children, I wanted them to be with a happy mom. I didn't wanna waste my time with them. I wanted to get the most out of every single moment, and I very much live in the space now of it's quality versus quantity, and, my kids helped me see that. We just embrace I guess now we embrace the unknown, and instead of fearing it, and we really just try and live in the moment and soak up every single small mundane moment that we get with them.
What would you tell your younger self now that you're kind of on this other side of it?
Oh gosh, I would give myself a big hug. I often think about this a lot because I think back of like the day that we found out that they had the more severe form. Um, and I had never felt so low and depressed in my entire life. And I wish that I could just, like, sit there and hug that Jillian and tell her things aren't gonna get easier, but you will become stronger and better equipped to handle the challenges ahead, and that there is still so much light and joy in this journey despite the circumstance that you're given.
I love that. How does it feel now to be in a position where people look to you as inspiration and motivation and being like a step ahead?
I am so touched whenever people reach out to me because it's not an easy thing, like, putting your life out there, for the world to see. I knew deep down that I wanted to do it because that's the only way to really help spread our story far and wide. And with our kids, time is not on our side. So the more outreach that we can do, the better in the shortest amount of time. So we decided to kind of really put our journey out there. And whenever I get messages from other moms of like that say like, "Oh my gosh, you have inspired me," like anything like that, like it makes it all worth it. And it just feels so good to take what is a really difficult situation and make some good out of it. And if I'm helping others along the way, like that is just an amazing bonus.
Yeah.
Obviously, like my priority is getting more awareness of their condition out there to hopefully someday have a cure for it. But gosh, when I hear from other moms, like it touches me.
Jillian, what were some of the ways that people supported you that you found to be meaningful?
My family first and foremost has been amazing throughout this journey. Just letting me process things the way I need to process them, and dealing with some crazy mood swings that happened early on. And our friends, our community has been incredible. We started a fundraiser years ago for we've been raising money for the Wilder Nation Foundation, which was actually started by another dad of a child who passed away from ASMD. He started a nonprofit, and they're the only nonprofit out there that's dedicated and laser focused on finding a cure for the neurologic aspects of ASMD. So we started fundraising for them, and just to see the way that our friends and family and community responded was just, oh my gosh, it was so beautiful. Just messages of encouragement. I often tell people this journey is definitely not easy. Like I feel like people look at our life and they're like, "Oh my gosh, how do they function?" That's so sad. But we have been able I feel blessed because we have been able to see so much kindness in humanity and in other people, complete strangers, that we probably wouldn't have seen otherwise, and I feel like that is such a gift.
What are some of the ways that people show up for you today that makes you smile?
Say we're impatient with our son, somebody will help us cut our grass, like things that we can't get to. Just like those little things that actually mean so much and take one little thing off of our plate. Anytime, friends or family or strangers help share our story,
Yeah.
that's huge to us, because our goal is awareness. And
No, I think that's important because, again, especially with your kiddos, it's because it's such a long journey.
Mhm.
I think sometimes the longer journeys are harder because you need people to stay on and support you, and sometimes you lose sight of what exactly you can be doing. I think it's an important reminder, and especially for your kiddos. Sometimes the most important thing you could do is just keep telling the story. Keep talking about it,
Mhm.
because that's ultimately going to drive results and impact and people knowing about this. That whether they serve your children or future children, like that's the hope, and that costs nothing. It costs nothing to for someone to say, hear about my friend Jillian's kids and how amazing they are and how we have to find treatment or a cure.
I always tell people the easiest thing you can do is to teach your children about differences, embracing differences, disability. That's something that I think this world needs. It needs to be more inclusive for kids like mine. And that's something so easy that people can do to help support not just us, but every family out there that has, medically complex children or children living with disabilities.
Yeah. So talk to me, and this is a good segue to talk a little bit more about resources. If there are moms that are maybe earlier on in their journey with ASMD or things like this, any advice of where
Mhm.
they should look beyond your Instagram page that might also provide relief to them or encouragement?
I'm immediately going to the financial side of things, because it is crazy overwhelming when you get thrown into this world of medical complexities and the hospital bills start rolling in. One of the first things that we did that was a huge help was speaking with a financial advisor at our children's hospital. I'm not sure if every children's hospital has them, but if yours does, highly recommend doing that earlier on rather than waiting. If your child's particular diagnosis has a national foundation, definitely reach out to them first and foremost. That was one of the first things that we did was reach out to the National Niemann-Pick Disease Foundation, which is my children's diagnosis, and they had tons of resources for us. They were able to connect us with other families early on so we could start, learning because it is hard because there's especially with rare disease, doctors tend to not know too much. Like, you get the diagnosis, and then it's like, you go home, and, "Great, you provided me with a diagnosis, but how do I care for them? Like, what do I need to be watching for?" So that's where the Niemann-Pick Foundation definitely was a huge help early on in that, and researching just local nonprofits who maybe offer grants, which is one of the reasons why I love Support Now, because you guys have the capability to do that for parents now, which is incredible because that is time consuming, and I totally recognize that not everyone has the time or the bandwidth, especially early on in a diagnosis to do those things, which is part of the reason why I just love what you guys are doing.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And I want you to also give people a heads up on the book.
Yes, of course. I actually just released my first children's book earlier this week. I have a copy here. It's called Soaring Together, and it is all about our specific journey that we've been on with our kids. It's aimed to show young children kind of teach them about disabilities and embracing differences and how our differences often lead to beautiful new perspectives, like my children have shown me, and that disability does not limit one's ability to have joy in their life. So it is available on Amazon right now, and then it will be available at other places in the upcoming weeks.
I love it. Good for you. Good for you, Jillian.
Yeah.
I want to say thank you. One of there's two words that I wrote down after listening to you talk. Um, I think of the word grace, both the grace that you gave
Mhm.
yourself and the grace that you show today. And I think of the word honest. I'm struck by how honest you are around how you truly felt at the
Mhm.
beginning and maybe even now, because I think that actually opens up the conversation to say, like, it's okay to be disappointed. It's okay to not
For sh
immediately find the silver lining or to see the glass half full. Like, it's okay. And so thank you
Mhm.
for your grace and your honesty today because those are the types of transparent conversations that I believe move us closer together. Um, and in a world of
Mhm.
Instagram where we like to show the best of the best, um, what
Mhm.
really connects us is when we're just being brutally honest with one another.
Of course, and I also just wanna say for any other parents out there, you know, it's it's taken me years to get to where I'm at now, to a point in my life where I feel peace surrounding my children's diagnosis, and able to have a lot of gratitude for things. On the topic of grace, please give yourself grace on getting to that point, and you're not gonna stay in that headspace all the time. I mean, I still have days where they just suck. Like, I can't find the silver lining. And that is something that I've learned, I feel like through this journey, I've learned to better handle that. I guess when I'm going through stages where I do feel grief or moments of grief, I'm able to recognize it, sit with it, realize, like, feel those emotions, don't bottle them up, like, sit with them for a while, and then I'm able to kind of pack them away now until they need to come out again, because this is something that I will unfortunately have to deal with for the rest of my life. Like, the grief is never going to go away, but you do get better equipped to deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you,
Yeah.
Jillian. I so appreciate your time, your perspective, and again, just the vulnerability. And it's so important. Again, and we just live in a world that thinks that we have to immediately gloss over what's hard and get to what's good. And I think it's cool to actually kind of sit in the things that are a little more uncomfortable here and there, not because you're harping on it, but because it's normal. It's normal, especially as moms. We all have dreams of a certain type of kid or family. And, whether or not you have a kiddo with a diagnosis or, medical challenges or not, there's always going to be some delta in between what you thought it would be and what it is. And obviously yours is much greater and much trickier to navigate. But I think you've even inspired me in terms of how I look at my kids and all the things that just come with being a mom. So, thank you so much. I will absolutely be linking your Instagram, the website, the book. So, if people are either experiencing what you're going through or know someone and want to be in a better position to empathize and show compassion and really educate their own kiddos on how best to be kind of a champion and an evangelist for your community, that they can do so. So, thank you, Jillian.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure.